Give me a sense of what Hugo Chavez, his legacy on the sort of the democracy that seems to be, or the democratization that seems to be ongoing in Latin America and Central America. Did he have any impact on that, or was by either what he did proactively or or simply by not being a reactionary force? I mean, what was his impact in that regard?
Well, I think it depends on how you define democracy. I think he's freely and fairly elected, so despite the right-wing rhetoric about how Chavez is an authoritarian, the Carter Center and others have validated all of the elections. So there's no question about that. But I would say that, some of his policies on the media, some of his policies towards the judiciary do raise questions for me. I also think that Chavez came out of the military. He surrounded himself with yes men and had a kind of and built up popular militias, and so there's a whole military association that makes me feel a little uncomfortable. But nevertheless, it depends on how you define democracy, because I was talking before about some of these popular measures for empowerment at the local level. Now, you could argue that maybe this doesn't jive with people's typical definitions of democracy, but economic cooperatives are a form of democracy. Workers have more control over their everyday lives. And like I said before, Venezuela has the most advanced system of cooperatives in the world. Even though Chavez didn't really tout those accomplishments internationally, I suspect, because he didn't want to alienate investors. But and again, with the communal councils, if you take away the cronyism and some of the problems, and admittedly, some of the communal councils were plagued with mismanagement and cronyism, and so I won't say it's a great picture, but just on its own, the idea of communal councils is a radical democratic idea. So it's just one more contradiction of Chavez and his long Bolivarian revolution, amongst many.
And how about his influence on the rest of Latin America? I mean, outside of Venezuela, was he where was he in the context of how Latin America seems to be changing now over the past 10, 15 years?
Well, I think, again, like I said before, up to 2006, I think maybe there was some interest in the wider region in this Chavez model, just for simple idealistic reasons. He was pushing this ALBA block, which is very innovative. In my view, one of the more innovative things that he did, trading outside of the usual corporate structures, barter exchanges internationally. I think maybe that appealed to the more idealistic left in the wider region. But I don't know in the long term whether the Chavez model, so to speak, is actually going to endure. And in fact, Chavez used to talk about this term, 21st century socialism, and that was never clearly defined. So I'm not sure whether there's a coherent model. And if anything, I think populism relies on this charismatic leader who doesn't have a very coherent ideology. And inevitably, a lot of these populist movements just implode once the charismatic leader is taken out of the equation. Having said that, there is Rafael Correa over in Ecuador who just won a resounding victory. And I think in certain respects, Rafael Correa is a protege of Hugo Chavez. He employs similar over-the-top rhetoric. He's a populist. He's an economic nationalist. And I think it'll be interesting maybe to watch Rafael Correa also, who's had problems with the U.S. He recently offered a diplomatic asylum to Julian Assange, and I think he's trying to gain more notoriety for himself. The only thing is Ecuador is a smaller country than Venezuela, and Venezuela itself is not even that large. It's like the size of California. So Ecuador is even smaller. It's got some oil, but even less than Venezuela. So I'm not sure whether Rafael Correa can wield the same heft as Hugo Chavez, although I'm sure that he's trying to fill those shoes.
And so now, what do you? It's obviously hard to anticipate what happens next with Venezuela, but um, am I wrong in imagining that right now there are a board of directors of the major oil corporations in the world right now who are at an emergency meeting talking about how they get to Venezuela first?
I certainly wouldn't be surprised by that. I think Hugo Chavez pursued a nationalistic oil policy. He built up PDVSA, the state-run oil company, which funded a lot of his social programs. He pursued an oil policy that was not nearly as aligned with U.S. energy policy. It's certainly not as much as his predecessors during the 1990s. He was a price hawk in OPEC under Ali Rodriguez, who was a communist guerrilla fighter from Venezuela, who became Secretary General of OPEC, and who was a price hawk. So yeah, I'm sure that I would not be surprised if the oil companies are trying to stage a comeback and want to realign Venezuela's oil policy on different lines, let alone probably end the oil shipments to Cuba. So that's another instance in which Venezuela probably fell afoul of the United States because it used this oil largesse in different and politically controversial ways in the wider region to gain allies.
What do you think U.S. policy, how does U.S. policy towards Venezuela change now? I mean, how aggressive do you think the United States is going to be in this context?
Well, I think to his credit, Obama has been a bit more circumspect, and there's been a ratcheting down of the saber rattling that we saw from the likes of Donald Rumsfeld, Condoleezza Rice, but there's still a diplomatic impasse, and just past few days, I think the Venezuelans expelled a couple of American diplomats who they said they were spying or they were actually military spies. So there's still we're going to have a big thaw in relations for things to improve, and so let's not underestimate the situation. Although, fortunately, we don't have that rhetorical back and forth of the Bush administration, and there hasn't been attempted coup d'états. But I'm sure that Obama has been aiding the opposition, funding through the usual means. But I think it's more a cosmetic difference as opposed to an actual practical difference.
It is amazing because it's hard to recall this, but during the Bush years, Venezuela was right up there with the axis of evil. I mean, I've almost forgotten it, but he was so demonized in this country by the Bush administration, and he seemed to obviously welcome it. And I think what I think Americans may know him best for, in some respects, is simply just helping with home heating oil subsidies, when these were cut off during the Bush years.
Right, exactly, and I think. I think that maybe Obama just made a calculated decision that hey, it's not really worth demonizing Chavez because then they'll probably rally the Latin left, and so I think Obama's just pursued a shrewder foreign policy. I'm not necessarily saying it's more moral in every respect, but I think it's just been shrewder and probably smarter in certain respects because. What did all that anti-Chavez rhetoric actually achieve? I mean, Chavez was built up in the eyes of many across the wider region in Argentina and everywhere he went. He was a hero. So it was almost counterproductive. You're trying to unseat Hugo Chavez, then you demonize him, then actually he's going to get more popular support through these kinds of pronouncements.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that the dynamic during the Bush administration, in the same way that Hugo Chavez used the United States as a rhetorical punching bag to enhance his own prestige, the same thing was done by Bush, frankly, because there's political efficacy in creating these boogeymen that with your domestic, if they're external boogeymen, it helps you with domestic politics, whether you're Hugo Chavez or whether you're George Bush. And it's just it has been fascinating to me, and just how Latin America and Central America have receded in terms of being those type of threats that we should be perceiving, in this country. I grew up at a time where, the Sandinistas were going to come and invade, the original Red Dawn. All of this seems to have changed. And it seems to have allowed for a flourishing of sorts, at least of some of these democratization movements throughout the region, and it's just sort of fascinating to see. And I wonder if that's in some ways going to be reversed now that there may be a sense that we could have access to that oil again within a short period of time.
Well, I also think, though, along the lines of what you're saying, that let's not go too far and come to the conclusion that the U.S. has necessarily lost influence. I think I've written a lot about these WikiLeaks cables and what they reveal about U.S. foreign policy in the wider region. And just because Hugo Chavez has rallied the left and there's this public shows of solidarity in South America against the U.S. and U.S. policies, the WikiLeaks cables reveal that the United States is still very much in the ballgame. And you see that, behind the scenes, these Latin leaders, be it Michelle Bachelet of Chile or any number of different cables, underscore just how fragile this Latin alliance really is and just how vulnerable they are to U.S. pressure. And so time and time again, these cables show how U.S. diplomats will be talking with, their counterparts in whatever South American country, and they'll be insulting their fellow leftist bloc in South America and cozying up to the U.S. So I think you have to distinguish between the public rhetoric on the one hand, so this leftist solidarity, but and on the other, what they say behind closed doors and how they cast aspersions on one another, and just how vulnerable they still are to U.S. Political economic pressure.
Well, it's fascinating stuff. Nikolas Kozloff, author of Hugo Chavez, Oil, Politics, and the Challenge to the U.S. and Revolution, South America and the Rise of the New Left. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll put a link up to nikolaskozloff.com where people can see more of your writings. Thanks again for joining us today.
Okay, thank you so much.